Hey, everybody. Tonight we're debating whether or not Trump is a fascist, and we're starting right now with Adam's opening statement. Thanks for being with us. Adam, the floor is all yours.
Yesterday, a man named Alex Preddy was executed in broad daylight. Federal agents dragged him off of a woman they had shoved to the ground while he tried to shield her from pepper spray. Alex was then pinned down by several officers as one began pistol whipping him and another removed his legally owned gun from its holster. He was then shot multiple times in the back and 5 more times as his body laid limp on the pavement. As this took place, one of the agents began clapping in celebration. When state authorities got a warrant to investigate, signed by a judge, federal officials still blocked them from the crime scene. Senior officials in the Trump administration have already labeled Alex an assassin and a terrorist who is, quote, brandishing a weapon. Meanwhile, the president has told us that only criminals carry guns on our streets, and the attorney general is offering to withdraw ICE from the state if it meets a set of demands, such as turning over its voter rolls. In the midst of this and countless other violations of American norms, civil rights, and basic decency, the word fascism has taken center stage. It's the word you'll hear thousands decry in unison as they march on the streets, and it's the word I'll be using today to describe the ascent of Donald Trump in American politics. The obvious question then becomes, what does it even mean? And the truth is, scholars have argued that question for decades, but are still farther than ever from consensus. For the purposes of this debate and my use of the label more broadly, I'll be drawing from 2 of the foremost scholars on the subject, Jason Stanley and Robert Paxton. Together, their frameworks effectively lay out both the characteristics of fascism and the mechanics of its growth. In his aptly titled book, How Fascism Works, Jason Stanley lays out his 10 pillars of fascism, characteristics which, when they emerge together, can be used to identify fascist movements. These include the mythic past, which is harkened back to as a nation's true identity, propaganda used to mask unpopular methods and goals with ideals that are widely accepted, unreality calling into question and manufacturing what is true. Hold on. Victimhood assigned to traditionally dominant groups who see equality as a threat to their position, and law and order used as a framing to divide the nation into those who are lawful by nature and those who are inherently lawless. Of course, all of these pillars can exist in isolation. Many even appear together, often overlapping with other forms of authoritarianism. But fascism should enter the conversation when they emerge concurrently and consistently as a pattern over time. That pattern is precisely what is laid out in the work of fascism's most prominent scholar, Robert Paxton, whose functional analysis of the term redefined the entire field, and in fact, directly refutes the Italian definition of the term I've heard Andrew use before. In his essay titled The 5 Stages of Fascism, he says, the words of fascist intellectuals, even if we accept for the moment that they constitute fundamental philosophical texts, correspond only distantly with what fascist movements do after they have power. Early fascist programs are poor guides to later fascist policy. He goes on to argue that fascism isn't actually an ideology, rather it's a dynamic political process, based more in mobilizing passions than a formal doctrine. Specifically, he lays out the 5 stages of its growth, like a cancer metastasizing within the body politic. Stage 1 is simply the emergence of proto-fascist sentiments, a discrediting of liberal and democratic values in favor of nationalism. Of course, this has been ubiquitous in modern democracies for decades now. But in stage 2, this sentiment takes root in national politics, often by becoming a player in the scene through a political party. Its success here is dependent on the presence of weakness or deadlock, either a humiliated state seen as a nation in decline, or a polarized one, where the right refuses to accept the legitimacy of a growing left. Stage 3 is the acquisition of power, a milestone that many fascist movements are never able to reach. Interestingly, Paxton points out that this often happens through legitimate means, as fascists find common cause with conservatives, while downplaying the excesses conservatives would find threatening. The 4th stage is the exercise of power, though this is actually not unilateral. Instead, fascist leaders are often forced, at least initially, to govern in association with the conservative elites they've joined, creating a 4-way power struggle between the leader, his party, regular state functionaries like agency heads or judges, and traditional elites like churches, the army, and big businesses. This all culminates with stage 5, where fascism can go in one of 2 directions, radicalization or entropy. Either the leader or his party double down on the extreme goals they had temporarily hidden, or the traditional elites win out and the state settles into a more default authoritarianism. While complex, these frameworks make a few things clear. Fascism is a style of politics. It's an orientation towards the use of power, relying on messaging just as much as its actual governance. And importantly, it doesn't always win. That's obviously a lot to remember, so for this debate, I've tried to distill it into something more concise. Fascism is a reactionary, ultranationalist, authoritarian movement characterized by appeal to a mythical past, malicious delegitimization of institutions, and pursuit/use of power to suppress and vilify outgroups. It arises as a response to perceived upheaval of sociocultural norms, national embarrassment, and/or elitism in society. This is a diagnostic definition of what we can call the fascist minimum, the true core of a concept that typically appears in many different forms. But to be even more clear, I'll be making 3 affirmative claims today. 1, that Trump is an authoritarian whose political project seeks to centralize and consolidate power by engaging with our laws in bad faith. 2, that he uses his position of power to vilify, intimidate, and oppress his opposition or those he designates as members of an outgroup. And 3, that he builds, fuels, and justifies this movement with allusions to a once glorious, now desecrated past, which can only be reattained through ultranationalism. I'm eager for Andrew to challenge these 3 claims and invite him to do so. But I am also curious about what his position is. Does he believe Trump is not a fascist, or is he just unsure? Because if it's the latter, I'm happy to convince him of my position. But if it's the former, I also have a lot of questions for him. Namely, that even if his definition is more narrow than mine, how could he not at least classify Trump as an authoritarian with fascistic tendencies? The man who says, quote, "I alone can fix it," who called for the termination of the US Constitution and said, quote, "He who saves his country violates no law." The man who calls his opposition vermin and in speeches to our military calls them the enemy from within, while saying that undocumented immigrants poison the blood of our country. Of course, he cloaks this darkness in the veil of ultranationalism, making America great again, saying the forgotten man and woman will be forgotten no longer, and that, quote, "the bedrock of our politics will be a total allegiance to the United States of America, and through our loyalty to our country, we will rediscover our loyalty to each other." Maybe Andrew will tell us not to believe our lying ears and eyes, or that Trump just says a lot of shit. Maybe he'll reference Article 2 to excuse virtually anything done with presidential powers, or downplay all the cases of lies, rights violations, and noncompliance as good faith mistakes or novel legal theories. But after watching a man get executed and hearing the federal government lie to our face about it, I'm frankly sick of hearing excuses and false equivalencies. I'm sick of being told to call stage 3 cancer a benign tumor just because the illness isn't terminal yet. So I hope this debate can serve as a detailed exploration of Trump's politics and an interrogation of both my 3 central claims and Andrew's claims to the contrary. I want to close with a quote from someone who seems to agree with my position here, Donald Trump, who said just months ago, "I did get elected for crime, but I didn't get elected for what we're doing. This is many, many steps above. I want to thank Stephen Miller. I'd love to have him come up and explain his true feelings, maybe not his truest feelings. That might be going a little bit too far."
So the problem with Adam's opening statement is that he commits the classical appeal to emotion fallacy. He's asking us to feel a certain way rather than prove that his position is factually correct. The Alex Pretty case is not directly proven to be tied to fascism. Bias in the audience emotionally before the argument even starts is really a low IQ debating tactic. And here is the next problem with his opening statement. Adam's overly broad definition of fascism is just pure vagueness and moving the goalposts. His definition of fascism includes nationalism propaganda, victimhood, law and order framing, and the problem with that is these exist in democracies, left-wing movements, and normal politics. It's like, if everything is fascism, then nothing is fascism.
Thank you very much for that opening, Adam. With that, we're going to kick it over to Andrew for his opening as well. Andrew, thanks for being with us. The floor is all yours.
Damn it, Con. You were the one. I thought you were going to, I was going to be I was hoping it was going to be a whole different thing, but it's just the normal TDS shit. So it's fine. This is exactly what the debate I prepared for, unfortunately, but I had hope. I had hope, Con. As we engage in this debate on if Trump is or is not a fascist, there are a few things I want to point out in the outset of the debate, a few tactics which are going to be going on. If I were my debate opponent, I would fallaciously argue that Trump isn't, quote, a full-blown fascist, but he's just mostly a fascist. And I'm very certain this is where he's going to go with this. So I wanted to, in the outset, prepare a demonstration for why this sort of arguing makes no sense and should ultimately be rejected. By the way, it's exactly what he did. I will do this by talking about chimpanzees and bananas. You see, a chimpanzee, by some accounts, shares 98% of the same DNA as a human being. Does that make a chimp 98% human? Do they seem 98% human to you, or do they seem like something else entirely? Here, I want to demonstrate this principle. This is a banana. It shares 60% of genes with human beings. Does it seem like it's 60% a human being, though? No, it doesn't. If I peel it, like I just did, and I eat it, am I engaging in 60% cannibalism? No, I'm not. Of course not. It's ridiculous on its face. But it's likely my opponent's going to try to tell you that Trump shares X amount of traits with fascists, exactly what he did. And so he's mostly a fascist. He's mostly a fascist, which is mind-boggling to me, but the standard fare argument of the idiot left. This needs to be rejected immediately for the obvious reason, which is ideologies have overlap but differ greatly in what they actually are and why they are or are not the thing. My opponent defines fascism, and I quote, "Fascism is a reactionary, ultranationalist, authoritarian movement characterized by appeal to a mythical past, malicious delegitimizing of institutions, and pursuit of power to suppress outgroups and vilify outgroups. It arises as a response to perceived upheaval of sociocultural norms, national embarrassment, or elitism in society." He bases this definition largely, he says, on fascist scholars like Robert Paxton, Jason Stanley. I think that they would reject his definition, honestly, because they don't consider Trump to be a fascist. They don't consider him to be a fascist, which is hilarious. Okay? Even Paxton, post J6, right, when he said that he's fine with the label now, still doesn't consider Trump to actually be a fascist. Under his criteria of fascism, which I'll grant for the sake of argument, Sanders would be a fascist. Bernie Sanders, the guy this guy likes. If we took out ultra-nationalists, he would fit every criteria Kahn listed. Sanders has an authoritarian movement. He wants to nationalize many industries away from the private sector. He would need state power to do so in a way which would obviously be oppressive to private interested parties and people. He appeals to and speaks positively of communist nation, appeals to their past policies and glories. He delegitimizes institutions maliciously like healthcare, police forces, ICE, all sorts of things. He wants to use state power to vilify the outgroup, millionaires and billionaires, and he wants power to do so. Now, is Sanders a fascist? Of course not. This is an example of how nebulous this broad definition can be used because it's just silly. Would this make him 60% fascist? No, it's ridiculous because the core pillar isn't there anymore. It's not there anymore for Sanders than it is for Trump. And that's this one pillar, ultranationalism. While I have a very different definition from Mr. Khan, I had to use a Star Trek reference of Khan, right, on what fascism actually is, and the pillars which hold it up, I would like to point out by his metric, Trump isn't a fascist and can't be because he isn't an ultranationalist. And without that, the whole pillar and house of cards falls down. Nationalism is a belief your country should come first before other nations. Ultranationalism is the belief your nation comes before everything else. God, family, morals, job, interest. The state becomes the core of the ideology, and it is an ideology, not just a core of traits. Trump is barely even a nationalist, let alone an ultranationalist. MAGA, his base of supporters, isn't asked or required to put Trump before God or family or other value systems they may hold. Not to mention, he has some pretty anti-nationalist policies like gold cards to buy citizenship for foreign nationals, or 600,000 imported Chinese students, or hundreds of thousands of Indians brought in for cheap labor, or any number of different anti-nationalist policies that I can point at. Tons of policies which Trump puts forward, and I could argue they're barely nationalistic at all, but certainly he isn't an ultra-nationalist, and without that pillar, he can't be a fascist. Now, I'm making a positive case here, to be fair, and so is my opponent. I'm saying Trump is not a fascist. He's saying he is. So I want to be charitable there. This is not I get to stay on the fence and just pepper him about his definition. He gets to interrogate me as well. That's fair, right? I'm happy on demand to provide my definition for fascism, its cores, philosophy of the third position, if you would like. I spent a lot of time in my debate career arguing against the tenets of the third position, i.e. fascism. What it is, its philosophy, its originators like Giovanni Gentili, Mussolini, others, the ideas of corporatism and the fasci, what that represents and why it represents that. What's happening here in actuality is this. The left and progressives like my opponent, in general, they want to use morally infused language to demonize their opposition by comparing them to Nazis and fascists, which they think are synonyms. They want all of the horrors of fascism to be laid at the feet of their political opposition, even if the political opposition doesn't share the ideology. And if they don't share the ideology, they just come up with new ways to define the ideology so they can make them share it. It's not that Trump is a fascist, you see. It's that the Holocaust happened and Mustache Man has the same ideology as Trump. So he's like them. And his allies in Italy and the fascists did the same thing too. This is what gives them the perceived moral high ground in which to resist the evil fascists. And that's all this has ever been. Purely performative, all lies, which is going to totally fall apart when I put this to the question. Watch. And with that, I'm happy to get into this. Now, I have each definition for semantic certainty that you could ever want. If you want ultranationalism, you want definitions for anything in my position, I've got them on hand. We're ready to go. I hope you got the same thing so that we can skip the semantics and get right to the meat of it, right? But yeah, I'm with that. I'm ready to get right into this.
Here's what Andrew did well. He immediately attacked Adam's definition. He used the chimp and banana analogy to argue similarity is not equal to identity, and also introduced strict definition of fascism. Ideology, ultranationalism, corporatism. This is a classic debate tactic. Narrow the definition or definitional retreat. But here are some of the flaws in Andrew's argument. There's a problem with the chimp banana example because biology is not equal to political ideology. Politics is in binary like species classification. Andrew then commits the strawman fallacy by trying to predict that Adam will argue mostly fascist, then he attacks that idea. But the problem with that is Adam actually argued pattern-based fascism and not percentages. Andrew overly narrows the definition. He defined fascism as strict ideology, includes ultranationalism, but ignores modern scholarly definitions process-based. He's redefining fascism so narrowly nothing qualifies.
You guys are cool with debating each of your definitions in terms of does Trump fit the definition of...
Well, each of our positions, my position would be that Trump is not a fascist. My opponent is saying that he is a fascist. And so we'll be debating from both of those angles. I don't care if the front half of the debate is loaded against me or against you. It doesn't really matter. I think it's fair to pepper me about what I think fascism is, just like I'm about to pepper you with what you think fascism is.
Sure.
Okay.
Either of you have a preference on whose definition we use first?
Well, let's go with Khan's. He's the one who's making the positive claim that he is the thing, and then we can get into mine. Or we can, even as we go, you can ask me if you'd like. That's fine.
I am curious, Andrew. Can you just quickly share your broad-based definition of fascism that you'd use as like a shorthand?
Yeah. So fascism is an ideology that proposes corporatist, palingenetic, and ultranationalist state. That's what fascism is.
Okay. I just want to start off by addressing a few of the things you said in your opening statement. So
yeah, hang on real quick, because I want to get some semantics out of the way, if you don't mind, just to make sure that we got this right. Ultranationalism is defined by you as what?
I would say that ultranationalism frames greatness of nations as a zero-sum game, where a nation's glory is derived from dominating other countries.
I have a quote here from those original fascists. I want to see if you will agree to this. Ultranationalists, from their view, all within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state.
Is this an ideological thing or a descriptive thing?
Yeah, of course it's ideological.
My definition of fascism isn't even ideological, so I would reject that off.
Okay, well, okay, how's it not ideological?
Like
It
I
is-
said,
it
it's
is
a
ideological.
socio-political phenomenon. That is how Robert Paxton and Jason Stanley describe it. And just to quickly clarify there,
It's not just how they describe it.
Hold on. They both call Trump a fascist. Robert
they don't.
Paxton says he doesn't use the word fascist because he finds it's basically colloquially lost all meaning. But after January 6th, Robert Paxton did say that Trump now meets the characteristics of fascism.
Nope.
And Jason Stanley has been saying the same for years.
No, well, first of all, Stanley's a political hack. Paxton is
Of
serious.
course you're going to say that.
No, so hang on. Paxton is serious. He's not a political hack. Like that guy is an actual, like he has studied fascism. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Stanley, yeah, he's a political hack. He's a leftist. Come on, man. Paxton, though, he's more politically neutral. But you're basically operating off Paxton anyway, not really Stanley, at least by the definition that you're giving. Paxton himself did not actually say this. You're making this up. Here's what actually happened. Paxton has been saying for years that Trump does not fall under the criteria of being a fascist. Post J6, he said he was fine with him being labeled that. He was very careful with his words, though. He didn't actually say there's anything new here which makes Trump fall under this label. Only that he was fine now with the label because it had some utility use.
Did you not read his Newsweek article?
I did. Well, not his Newsweek. It wasn't Newsweek.
He wrote a piece in Newsweek after January 6th where he said, I'm now calling Trump a fascist.
Well, hang on. Let me pull the article up here.
Sure.
1 second. We'll make sure that we have it correct. But yeah, that was my interpretation from it because of the very first line. Read the very first two lines. It's all vibes and feelings, bro. Just read it. Read it out loud.
Lines of what?
Read the first two lines of the article that you're referencing.
Sure, let me pull it up.
Yep, pull it up.
I'm curious why I pulled that up. Where are you deriving that he didn't call Trump a fascist?
Well, he was very cautious with his language in this article.
So it's literally titled, hold on, let me make sure, by Robert
It doesn't matter what it's
Paxton.
titled. It matters what
I've
he said.
hesitated to call Donald Trump a fascist until now.
Yeah,
I
that's
resisted
what
for
they
a long
are.
time applying the fascist label to Donald J. Trump. He did indeed display some telltale signs in 2016. I mean, you want me to read the whole thing, or
No,
he goes on
but
to say
just
he's now.
right in the first line, right?
Uh
I've hesitated to label Donald Trump a fascist,
huh.
even though he had telltale signs,
Past
right?
tense.
Yeah. What was the
Hesitated
new
past tense.
What's
right?
the new criteria according to your definition that Trump fell under after J6? What is it?
I believe he said the leveraging of political violence. I can find specifically in
Yeah.
the
What about
article.
you though? You have a specific definition here.
Mhm.
Did you agree with Paxton that before J6 Trump wasn't a fascist?
I would think that Trump was probably in stages 2 or 3 of fascism prior to January 6th, and I think after that we started arriving between stages 3 and 4.
So he was at at a certain percentage.
It's not percentages,
We're back
it's
to the
stages.
argument from banana.
It's a cute analogy, but the biology of a fruit is not analogous